Julian was walking with his dog Spike in the forest when he suddenly came across a huge plant. Spike started to bark at it, and Julian understood why because he got chills from it himself. Then, all of a sudden, a ranger ran toward Julian and Spike. He screamed, "Watch out! Get out of there! You're not supposed to see this!" Julian was astonished at what was happening here. What the heck did this plant do here? And who placed it? Little did he know that his finding would turn his life upside down. Julian was first worried about Spike. He needed to get away from that plant. "Get away from there!" he shouted. This was no place for a dog. He had never seen anything like this before. They had to get away from this place. It was a ranger, and he wasn't alone. Julian saw 2 helicopters circling the sky. "We're going to have to take you with us, Julian," the ranger said. "You were not supposed to see this." What was so special about this forest? And what kind of plant did Julian discover? It started as a typical day for Julian. He woke up, got himself ready, and walked downstairs. He expected to see his dog waiting for him by the door to be let out, but his dog was nowhere to be found. "Spike! Spike!" Julian shouted. He started to worry. Where could he be? Julian opened the door to the yard, and Spike came running in. Weird, Julian thought. He could have sworn he let Spike inside last night. He fed him his breakfast and got his hiking gear ready. Julian lived in a little town between 2 mountains. There was always something new to see. He checked his map to look for a place he hadn't discovered yet. Julian loves to go hiking and discover new places. He sees a little open spot on the map and decides to go there. He packs up his car and puts Spike in the backseat. They always go together. He could never have known this wasn't such a good idea today. As they drive around the mountain, Julian notices it looks different from the map. There should be a nice open spot for Spike to run around. Instead, there is a big forest. My map must be old, Julian thought. But that didn't feel right. There was something off about this forest. Julian parked his car and began his hike. He passed some beautiful spots and couldn't believe he had never heard of this place before. He is part of a hiker's group chat, and no one had ever spoken about this place. Spike was as happy as always, but that wouldn't last very long. Where is Spike? After a nice long break, Julian wanted to continue his hike. He called for Spike, but he didn't return. He must have run off somewhere. He usually wouldn't care and walk further because Spike always found his way back to him. But this day has been nothing but ordinary, so Julian starts to search. He walked the same route back to his car, but Spike wasn't there. He decides to go back to his lunch break spot, but can't seem to find it anymore. After looking around for 10 minutes, Julian felt like he was lost. How is this possible? He was sure this was the right way, or was he? Everything looks so similar. Julian stumbles upon a small open field in the forest. It looks idyllically perfect, almost fake, but he could smell the scent of the flowers, so it must be real. He felt like he had entered another world. He could only hear the peaceful sound of the birds and the wind through the trees. But there was something else too. He saw something moving behind an old willow tree. It was hard to see what it was because it was hiding in the shadow. He wondered what kind of creatures would be living in this forest. It didn't seem like a lot of humans came here. Then he heard a strange sound coming from the willow. A little creak or whine, maybe. Then suddenly, Spike jumped up from behind the tree. Julian was relieved to see him again. "Don't go running off again, Spike," Julian said. But Spike had an unusual look in his eyes. He seemed a bit on edge. Julian had never seen Spike act like this before. What had happened when he was away? Julian thought about leaving the forest and letting Spike rest. But it seemed like Spike wanted to stay here for some reason. Julian found it a bit strange, but he also felt he had to discover more about this strange forest. He almost felt compelled to stay here. They started walking along a little gravel path. Next to the track was a trail of white flowers. He had never seen these types of flowers before. He got a little lightheaded. Everything smelled so enchanting. Spike was running around like crazy, rolling through the flowers. They looked so good Julian could almost eat them. Almost. Julian had lost all track of time. The sun was setting, and the sky turned a beautiful shade of orange. As if this place wasn't magical enough, he thought. He had completely forgotten why he was here or what he was doing. Spike had run in front of him and was entirely out of sight. But Julian wasn't paying attention. All he could think of were the sounds and colors in this forest. Everything seemed to be intensified. The trees started to flow in the wind. It reminded him of the waves in the sea. The birds were chirping the most beautiful songs he had ever heard. He felt like he was dreaming, but this was not a dream. The next thing Julian remembers is waking up in the same open spot again. What has happened? He could have sworn he and Spike walked away from this place. Were they walking in circles? He searched his backpack for his map, but couldn't find it. He checked his phone, but he had no service. Great! Are you up? Julian got up and felt a little drowsy. He started walking, but it wasn't easy to keep a straight line. Spike ran to him, barking at him like he had to show him something. Julian followed Spike along the path they had already walked yesterday. He tried to think of what had happened yesterday, but got frustrated when he couldn't. Spike ran in front of Julian, and he had to hurry to keep track of him. Julian shielded his face from the pollen that were flying around. Then he stopped. Julian couldn't believe what he was looking at. "Spike, get away from there," he shouted. "This is getting weirder by the minute." Julian picked up Spike and put him in his backpack. "This is way too dangerous." Julian took his phone out and started recording. No one would believe this story. He needed proof. You only see these things in movies. He looked at his phone, but the screen had turned black. Weird. He charged it yesterday and hadn't looked at it since. An uneasy feeling ran through his body. There was something about this forest, and it was all connected to this thing in front of him. It had to be. This was no ordinary forest. He took a few steps forward. What is this thing? It was almost as tall as him, with big white spots and spikes that looked like teeth. Suddenly, he realized what he was looking at. It was a giant plant, but it must be a new species. Julian still wanted proof and decided to cut a piece of the plant to take with him. He took out his pocket knife and started cutting. It was a lot harder than he anticipated. This plant had sturdy vines, and a lot of juice seeped out of them. Julian's hands started to get slippery, and he had to hurry up before they became too wet. Finally, he had cut a piece from the plant. It felt a little rough in his hands, like a piece of sandpaper. He hurried back to his car, but when he found his way out of the forest, something else was waiting for him. The forest Julian had been in was actually a restricted area by the government. They were experimenting with different types of psychedelic flowers and were cross-referencing to make a really powerful drug.